Hey you guys, it's Peter, and this is a different kind of video for me to make over here today. This is actually a video that I have been thinking about making for quite some time, and it just, last night felt like the stars aligned, and I started making notes. I have tons of notes to read from and to reference. But I think that I need to tell a little bit of a backstory before I get into all of this. And what I'm going to be talking about today is about the case of Herb Baumeister, who was a serial killer that lived in Indianapolis, Indiana. It is a supposed solved case, although I believe that the case is unsolved. And I'm going to explain to you why I think that this case is unsolved to this day, even as they continue to find remains and identify bodies of the victims of Herb Baumeister at his home, Fox Hollow Farms, which I have visited and I'm going to talk about in this video today. Very nervous to make this video. I'm scared to make this video because I'm going to talk about some things in this video that I've never actually talked about before. It's interesting because I'm not a big believer in coincidence. And so when this happens and that happens and this happens and that happens, it's like when you're in the middle of all of that, it feels like this is your story to tell. Like maybe there's a reason why all this information keeps on coming to you. And that's how I have felt for quite some time. But before I get into this, I just want to say, I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I live about 2 hours south of Delphi, where the Delphi murders occurred. And there is this kind of ambiance in Indiana, a very hush-hush ambiance in Indiana, that you speculate about what happened with the Delphi murders, even though they have supposedly caught the person. But you don't really go much further into that. And there are a lot of people that I have met through the years since the Delphi murders occurred that would say, oh, this person's involved. I know through this person and that person. I've heard through this person and that person. Indiana is Midwest. Indiana is very small town. It's exactly what you imagine when you watch shows, true crime shows, like Murder in the Heartland. It is small town Midwest is what Indiana is. And if you're from a small town or you're from the Midwest, one of the things that you'll know is that everybody knows everybody through 2 or 3 other people. And so you hear stories, and people have asked me for years to cover the Delphi case. I've heard a lot about the Delphi case. I've heard a lot about people behind the scenes that were involved in it. I've heard about why they've never released the rest of the recordings on the telephone. I've heard so many different things, right? Hearsay, evidence, I don't know. But one of the reasons why I have really never gone into depth talking about the Delphi case is because there's this very hush-hush mentality in talking about any kind of dark, scary crime in the Midwest, that you just stay quiet about it, right? I'm a believer that staying quiet about those things sometimes keeps those stories alive and keeps them hidden, which is one of the reasons why I decided to finally come out and share some things about the Herb Baumeister case. The Delphi case, when it was going on, was at the time that I was starting to look deeper and deeper into the Herb Baumeister case. And at that time, I went to his old residence, which is called Fox Hollow Farms, and I did a paranormal investigation, which I was invited to go do by several people that had found me through videos that I had done about Herb Baumeister on YouTube in the past, because I've talked about this in several videos before, about indirect occasions of possibly having met him and things like that. And then the story kind of evolved from there. And at the time that I was like looking into it deeper, and then I started getting reached out to people, and then I started having more and more people contact me about things they knew, was at the time that the Delphi case was going on. And I was witnessing people coming out and saying things about what was going on with the Delphi case and being very afraid to share what was going on. And so people weren't sharing what they knew or what was going on with the Delphi case. I believe, personally, to this day, that there is a lot about the Delphi case that we do not know. I've heard so many stories about behind-the-scenes things that have happened with the Delphi case and finding the person, you know, and all this kind of stuff, that I have to believe in my heart of hearts that when you hear the same thing from 4, 5, 6 people that are not directly connected to each other, that there has to be some form of truth to that. That being said, I equally feel the same way about the Herb Baumeister case, and it has been a case that I have been intrigued with since a very, very young age. When his victims were the same age as me, and I was the age group that he was picking from for his victims. I was going to the same bar that he was picking his victims from, and I was in the mix of my alcoholism and my addiction. I got sober December 17th of 1994. That was right in the middle of when Herb Baumeister was killing gay men in Indianapolis, Indiana. So I have some notes before I get into this, because now I've kind of like gone on and ad-libbed a little bit here more than I wanted to. So I want to just read to you a little bit from my notes that I wrote last night. Whenever I do true crime videos, people always ask me to do more. But there's one case that haunts me to this day that is a supposed closed case that I do not believe has adequately been solved. It's hard for me to talk about the other cases until I give this one the justice it deserves. But in talking about this, I feel like I'm opening Pandora's box. And I do, because the last time that I talked about it, I started getting reached out to by a lot of people, which I will talk about later in this video. I have reached out to several of them to ask if I can share some information. I haven't heard back from most of them. So that might be a further video if you guys are interested in that. This is a very different video for me. If you're interested in me doing more of true crime kind of videos over here, I'm more than willing to do that. True crime is something that I have been interested in for a very, very long time. Let's go back and kind of give a little history of this. Okay, so my dad's dad, my grandfather, was a homicide detective in Allen County, Indiana. And I grew up hearing stories told about my grandfather of when he would go out on cases and coming home and having this clue and telling these stories. And, you know, Allen County is Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's North Indiana. And, you know, this was in the 40s and the 50s. And when a lot of people were highly obsessed with crime and things like that. And actually, my grandfather was the first homicide detective in Allen County, Fort Wayne, to solve the first homicide in Allen County, or the first unsolved homicide in Allen County. And I later found out several years ago that my grandfather was on the front telling the story of a true crime, true detective magazine. That my aunt still has this magazine. My grandfather has since passed. He passed when I was, you know, before I was 10 years old. So that's kind of always been in my blood, and heard these stories and things like that. My dad has told me stories about how when he was growing up as a kid, that he would watch Perry Mason, like when he was in, I think, high school, with my grandfather, and that within first 5 minutes, if you don't know what Perry Mason is, it's with Raymond Burr that was in Rear Window. It's a detective show, I think from like the 50s, and my grandfather would solve the case of every show in the first 5 minutes of watching it. It's like something that my dad has always told me. But that's not necessarily where true crime stops for me. My mother's mother, was also very interested in true crime. Interestingly enough, I might have found out why later, which I'll explain here in just a second. But she would always be reading well, she wasn't reading a Harlequin novel. She was reading I can remember my grandma smoking Salem Lights and drinking a cup of coffee and reading those pulp true crime novels that you would get at the bottom of the grocery store. You know, at the bottom of all the books is where the paperback true crimes were. And then she would also get those magazines, which we don't really see as much anymore. But when I was growing up, there were all these true crime magazines. I think they were actually called like True Crime, and they would have, you know, these huge spreads of stories about, you know, people being killed and all this kind of stuff. Interestingly enough, after my grandmother passed away, it had been speculated by a friend of my mother's that my mother actually had a twin, a fraternal twin, that went to high school with my mother for 1 year. I've told this story many, many times on my vlog, but this came out after my grandmother passed away. I can remember my mom asking a lot of questions about this, asking what had happened. It was my mom's friend who has also since passed away. She lived on Beaver Island her entire life, and after she graduated from high school, she lived in San Francisco for a while, and then she moved to Beaver Island where her family had a home, and she lived there for the rest of her life until she passed away 3 years before my mom passed away. And she was the one that started the story because she was friends with the man that was supposedly could have been my mother's fraternal twin. So here's the deal. My mother's father died when my mom was, I believe, 4 years old. My grandmother was single. My grandparents were both very, very poor. In fact, my mother and my aunt were in and out of the foster care system for a very long time in their youth. My cousin and I are just kind of now finding out some of the truth. If you guys have watched me do a previous video about this, me and my cousin talking about how we wanted to investigate this, we're just now kind of trying to find out some of the things. The person that would have been my mother's fraternal brother went to the high school that my mother went to for 1 year, and then he left. The reason that he left was that his father was killed and murdered by his mistress. And this guy was a huge executive here in Indianapolis, and the story was huge. And he had had this mistress for years. He had had several mistresses for years, right? Interestingly enough, I can remember a Christmas Eve in driving back from Christmas Eve, the midnight service, with my aunt and my uncle, my cousin, and my mom and I in the car. And my aunt was in the passenger seat. My mom and I and my cousin Caroline were in the back seat. And I brought this story up because my mom's friend Diane had just been visiting, and she brought it up. And I kept on saying this thing about, oh my God, does my mom have a twin brother? I was very intrigued by the whole thing. And my aunt turned around and she said, whatever secrets mother died with, she died with. And so my mom continued to look into it. Several years before her friend Diane passed away, her friend that would have supposedly possibly been my mom's fraternal brother, or twin brother, he would come and visit the island, which is what Diane called it, Beaver Island, Michigan, several times every couple years, and whatever, he would come and visit. And I think it was a couple years before Diane passed away, his adoption was closed. So he had been adopted, and his adoption was closed in Indianapolis. So all they could give him was a birth date, and his birthday, I believe, was within, I think, a week or 10 days of my mother's birthday, which added more intrigue to it. When I lay their yearbook pictures side by side, they look like fraternal twins. It's bizarre. Yet another piece of my personal life that is somewhat a true crime mystery. Later, after my mom passed away, I was having a conversation with my dad. I've shared this in many, many videos. I was having a conversation with my dad, and I said, did mom have any secrets, that she never told me and things like that? And my dad said, no, she didn't really have any secrets. He was like, well, she had one thing, but she swore me to secrecy. She told me before we got married, and then she swore me to secrecy and said that, she didn't want me to ever tell anybody, and that was that your grandmother went to prison. Okay, so I found out that my grandmother, my mom's mom, went to prison for embezzlement. I thought it was one time. We got the dates wrong. I feel like certain things are being kept from me to this day. My cousin and I have looked into it. We, at one time, thought we were going to do a whole documentary series talking about it. It's very hard to find some information out, but what we did find out was that my grandmother actually went to prison twice for embezzlement. And during a lot of those early years of my mother's life, she was in and out of the foster care system and lived with several different families. And a lot of the people that my mom referenced in her youth, I am not sure if they were actually family or if they were foster parents, things like that. I'm not really sure to this day, but my cousin and I continue to look into this day. So my life has always been riddled with mystery and intrigue. And so I'm always very interested in any kind of solving of a case. And I do believe that true crime is very much like a puzzle where you have a piece here and a piece there and a piece there, and you're trying to put it together to tell an elaborate story. But until you have all the pieces, you can't really tell the whole story. Which is why I think so many people are interested in true crime, because it's really about the solving of a crime to tell the story. And much of it, I believe, is in the telling the story of the victims, something that's very important for me. For those of you that don't know, several years ago, I started a online true crime book club with my good friend Mel. Hey Mel, how are you? And one of the things that is very, very important to us in picking books where we address true crime is that the books pay homage to the victim. That it's not just an elaborate detailing of the killer to make the killer seem super worldly, but that the victims are paid homage to as well. And in fact, our book for this month is Blood on Their Hands by Mandy Matney. Many of you might know who Mandy Matney is. She's a very popular podcast, and her book is about her beginning and looking into the Murdaugh dynasty and the Murdaugh killings. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. It's a fantastic book. If you guys would like to join us, all you have to do is join the Facebook group. It's listed below. But it's a fantastic book. Listening to that book last night, and then on the heels of that, I've been watching this show, for the past 2 nights. It's on Hulu, and it's called A Murder at the End of the World. And it's about a true crime writer that investigates this case of missing women in the Midwest. But it's also intertwined with this story of how she is invited to this retreat. And it's very, very interesting. But one of the things that she said, and she says it several times in the show, and it kept on coming back to me last night, which, in reading these messages, and I'll get to that in a second, but she says in there, to find the killer, you need to look more into the story of the victim. And that kept on sticking with me. And then I happened to get on Twitter last night, and somebody again sent me another message of a news article where they are continuing to identify and have just recently identified victims from her Baumeister at Fox Hollow Farms. So, before I get into this any further, I'm going to make sure that I have all of my notes up to date. Before I get into this, I want to go on to Wikipedia and just give you guys a brief outline of who her Baumeister is. Now, I can tell you, I have listened to every podcast. I have watched every video, I have watched every documentary, and the majority of the documentaries about her Baumeister always focus on a paranormal aspect to it. And the house that he lived in, which is called Fox Hollow Farms, it was a horse farm, and the fact that there are ghosts in the woods, ghosts in the house, and things like that. The focus on her Baumeister is always about the paranormal, okay? It's never about the story really of the victims or whatever. Recently, a news station from Indianapolis, I think this was about a year ago because I watched it around Halloween, did a fantastic documentary on her Baumeister and the victims, and it all took it from the point of view of 2 victims' families. It was probably the best documentary that I have ever seen about her Baumeister. Interestingly enough, okay, I think that the count of victims that they have, based on the bones that they have at Fox Hollow Farms, when we were there, we were told that the number is close to 29, okay? He was also known as the I-70 killer, which I will get into in just a second when I read you this. So when you add all that up together with 29 bodies that are of bones that they can identify, not to mention the ones that they cannot identify, or there's many that they have never identified. I think there's 11 they've never identified. But of the bones, they're still continuing on a daily, weekly basis to find bone fragments. There's a creek that runs behind Fox Hollow Farms, and people find bones in the creek all the time. 30 years later, people are still finding bones in the woods and in the creek, okay? So there's really no idea to understand how far it goes, or where he could have dropped bodies, or where he could have left body parts, on and on and on, okay? The other thing is that he was also the I-70 killer, and it's estimated that he killed, I think, upwards 10, 20 or more men as that, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in the United States, okay? Having one of the biggest numbers of victims of any serial killer, and yet there's almost nothing talked about him. In fact, when we picked to read his book last year for a true crime book club, the book that we found to read about him was written partly by the guy that owns the house and somebody else, And there was nothing in the book that I didn't already know based on a Wikipedia page and having gone there for a paranormal investigation. There's really no good source material out there. There's really never been any good documentaries out there. But yet there's still this story that's being told that it's a solved case, even though I've heard from multiple people that there's a possibility, including when we went to Fox Hollow Farms. They even said that it had been alluded that he had accomplice. I've heard from many other people that there was a possibility that he had accomplices, many people, 6 to 8 other people that were involved in this, which could have been a ring of people that were doing this whole, and powerful people that were doing this whole entire situation, right? And so when you think about it from that point of view of why the story has really never been talked about, and yet Herb Baumeister, a serial killer from Indiana, okay, had one of the biggest counts of victims of any serial killer in the United States, and yet very little is ever talked about him. But then it's alluded to the fact that he could have had many accomplices and that this was actually a ring of powerful men that were doing this in Indiana. It makes you wonder if there's more to this story and why the story has never been talked about or investigated deeper until now, when more people are being identified. When I was watching this last night and it was talked about, or the show was talking about, if you want to find out more about the killer, focus on the story of the victim. I was thinking about the time when this all happened. Okay, this was the early 90s. This was the late 80s and early 90s when Herb Baumeister was committing these crimes, okay, when he was killing these young gay men. And these young gay men, all right, many of them were homeless. Many of them were prostitutes and sex workers. Many of them were people that were drunk, that didn't have a lot of friends, that were going out to gay bars, that were looking for other people to hook up with and whatever. These were the people that he went after in Indianapolis. People that probably nobody would report and nobody would miss, okay? And when you look at that time, I can remember that time in Indianapolis. I had several friends of mine that had hate crimes that happened to them simply for being gay. I had a lesbian friend of mine, okay, that was beat in an alley right outside of a gay bar. Police officers pretty much witnessed the whole thing. And then I also had a friend of mine that was shot in the head and left for dead by 2 guys that supposedly he was giving rides home to after the bar, okay? And in either of those cases, the police never really got involved and investigated. And you have to think about the culture at that time, right? Especially in the Midwest, that gay men were expendable, okay? Especially gay men of color, of which were many of Herb Baumeister's, his victims were gay men of color, gay men that were homeless, gay men that were sex workers, gay men that didn't have a lot of close relationships with family, gay men that had a small friend group. He knew what he was doing. He knew who he was picking out. He followed them closely. And so the fact is that the ball was dropped. People weren't missing these people, so nobody was looking for them, and so the investigation at some point was halted. There was actually only one person in Indianapolis that really went hardcore on trying to investigate this, and if you've watched the documentaries, what you will find is that he was kind of met with difficulty at every single thing. Fox Hollow Farms is in Hamilton County, but most of the men were from Marion County, which is where Indianapolis is. Herb Baumeister's home was in Carmel, Indiana, which is Hamilton County, so it was the differences of counties having to work together to exchange information. And there was a lot of difficulty that happened with that and exchanging of information and whose territory really was this, and on and on and on. Recently, when my book club friend Nikki came to Indianapolis, we drove by Fox Hollow Farms because she wanted to see where it was at. You cannot even get onto Fox Hollow Farms now. It is actually a gated community where there are several other houses that have been built, $1 million homes that have been built on the property leading up to Herb Baumeister's home, which is still there. There are several $1 million homes that are on this gated property that used to be a horse farm. So you can't even get onto the property anymore and look. So the people that are finding the bones and finding these things are finding them in the woods behind there when they're going in the woods, going in the creek and things like that. So let me read you the Wikipedia page just quickly. Podcasts have done it. My Favorite Murder, I think, read the Wikipedia page, so I'm just going to read you part of it. Herbert Richard Baumeister was an American businessman and suspected serial killer. A resident of the Indianapolis suburb of Westfield, Indiana, Baumeister was under investigation for, he's from Westfield, not Carmel, they're right next to each other, for murdering over a dozen men in the early 1990s, most of whom were last seen at gay bars. Police found the remains of 11 men, 8 identified, on Baumeister's property. Baumeister committed suicide after a warrant was issued for his arrest. He was later linked to a series of murders of at least 11 men along Interstate I-70, which occurred in the early 1980s to the early 1990s. It says on here, the I-70 Strangler is a nickname of an unidentified American serial killer who killed at least 11 young boys and adult men in Indiana and Ohio between June 1980 and October 1991, dumping their bodies near Interstate 70. The killer met his victims in popular gay bars and other similar establishments within a 4-block radius of Indianapolis. All of the victims were later found naked or partially clothed near Interstate 70, often dumped in rivers, streams, and ditches in the rural countryside. Each had been strangled to death. Now, what people speculate is that actually Herb Baumeister, as the I-70 killer, came before he was actually taking gay men to his home at Fox Hollow Farms, killing them there, cutting up their bodies, burning them in a burn pile in the woods, okay? So it goes on to explain about the I-70 killer and all this kind of stuff. Fox Hollow Farms killing. The Baumeister purchased and moved to Fox Hollow Farms in May of 1988. The home was built in 1978, was sold for $987,500 by his wife. The 18-plus acre, 4-bedroom, 10-bathroom, 11,000 square foot, 572 square foot property was listed as it goes on. On June 24th, 1996, investigators recovered human bone fragments of at least 11 people buried in the woods at Fox Hollow Farms, an 18-acre property owned by Baumeister off 156th Street and on the Monn Trail in Westfield, Indiana, which is a walking trail that people walk behind this, okay? A new search on December 4th, 2022 found one bone and identified 20 additional locations that might have more remains buried under the ground. Only 80 people have been identified since the initial only 8 people have been identified since the initial discovery. The additional 3 remains are still identified, although they are believed to be male and to have been victims of homicide. Hamilton County Coroner's offices have appealed to the public requesting anyone with missing family members from the mid-1980s to mid-1990s in the Indianapolis area to complete a DNA test in an effort to help identify the victims' remains. As of January 2024, forensic experts continue working in an effort to identify nearly 10,000 human remains. 10,000 human remains recovered from Fox Hollow Farms, and they are still finding remains as of today, okay? So it goes on and on and on, and it talks about additional victims, and that they link this disappearance of somebody else and things like that. What's interesting about this story, okay, is that actually Baumeister's son found I think it was a skeleton in the woods, and told his mother about it. When his mother confronted her husband about it, he said that it was a skeleton from his dad because his dad was a doctor here in Indianapolis, okay? When the police first came out and asked his wife if they could search the property, she said no. Later, when it was found, okay, on the day that Herb Baumeister fled to Canada after the police came to Westfield to his property of Fox Hollow Farms, he was at their lake house with their son. When the police wanted to search Fox Hollow Farms, that was when she called the police and said, if you can get my son back safely, you can come onto the farm and you can look at anything that you want to, right? Which was at the point that Herb Baumeister, when he saw it on the news, fled to Canada, okay? And this is the rest of the story when it talks about his death down here, okay? With a warrant out for his arrest, oh, here it is. Police identified, hold on a second. In the early 1990s, investigators with the Marion County Sheriff's Department and Indianapolis Police Department began investigating the disappearance of gay men of similar age, height, and weight in the Indianapolis area. In 1992, they were contacted. Now, you have to remember, I got sober December 17th of 1994. This is when I was going to gay bars. The gay bar that they are talking about is a gay bar that is called Greg's in Indianapolis, which we used to call Our Place. Well, it was called Our Place. We used to call it OP's, which was where he used to go to find these gay men. In 1992, they were contacted by a man named Tony, claiming that a gay bar patron, calling himself Brian Smart, had likely killed a friend of his, Roger Goodlet, based on his suspicious interest in Goodlet's missing persons case, and had attempted to kill him in a pool house hose during an erotic asphyxiation session in his mansion after he had met him in a local Indianapolis gay bar, the 501 Club, which was since closed down, but at that time, the 501 bar was a leather bar in Indianapolis. This is going to stop. Hold on just a second. I knew this was going to be a long one today, but I had no idea. Harris eventually saw this man again in August 1995, following his car and noting his license plate number. This was actually something that if you watch the documentaries and you read the book, he did in collaboration of working with the police to try to track down and find who was the serial killer in Indianapolis. Police identified Brian Smart as her Baumeister. Investigators approached Baumeister, told him he was a suspect in the disappearances, and asked to search his house. Both Baumeister and his wife, Julie, refused to allow a search of their property. By June 1996, however, Julie had become sufficiently frightened by her husband's erratic behavior that after filing for divorce, she consented to a search. Well, she only consented to a search when her husband had their son at the lake house. The search of the estate was conducted while Baumeister was on vacation at their lake house with her son. It turned up the remains of 11 men, 8 of whom were identified. With a warrant out for his arrest, Baumeister fled to Ontario, where he committed suicide at Pine Airy Provincial Park on Lake Huron by shooting himself in the head. Baumeister left a 3-page suicide note written on yellow notepaper. He regretted messing up the park, he wrote, and felt badly about his broken marriage and failing business. But he did not mention the remains of his victims or admit to any crime. He described items on his trip, including his intention to kill himself in a different place, but seeing children there had changed his mind. His final meal was a peanut butter sandwich. Okay. What's interesting about this is that obviously this is Wikipedia, so they're not going to include tons. But in this most recent, I think it's WRTV. If you watch, if you put into YouTube search bar and you put in Fox Hollow Farms, her Baumeister, WRTV, Indianapolis News, it'll come up. It's a fantastic documentary they just put out in the last year. And what's so interesting is that one of the victims that they identify was actually the brother of a woman that worked for her Baumeister. Her Baumeister owned a chain of stores that were thrift stores in Indianapolis called Save-A-Lot. It was why he and his wife were so wealthy. And a woman that worked for her Baumeister at the time that her brother went missing, okay, was working for... She was working for him and coming to work upset. She shares her story in this documentary, you know? And on and on and on. And there's so much to this story, and it's so complex when you go into it and you find out. So how her Baumeister was supposedly killing these gay men was that he would lure them home to basically hook up, come back, he would give them a drink, he would many times drug them with the drink. He had an indoor pool, and if you guys want to see the inside of the house, I think it's my #1 viewed vlog on my vlog channel, Peter Vlogs, and it's just called Fox Hollow Farms. My friends Melissa and Aaron and I went out there for a paranormal investigation. Melissa and Aaron have done a lot of paranormal investigations. They've done, you know, psychiatric closed down asylums and hospitals. They've done jails and things like that. And so they wanted to go along with me when I was reached out. I didn't want to go alone, so we went out there together. I filmed the whole thing. The whole thing is on my vlog if you guys want to go see the inside of the house, if you want to see the pool and everything like that. And so anyway, so he would take them and then he would get them in the pool and then he would strangle them with the pool hose. When we were there, the owner of the house told us that the pool hose that was still there was supposedly the same pool hose that her Baumeister killed these men with, which was interesting to me at the time and later because I thought, why would they not have taken that pool hose for evidence? But I've actually heard that in quite a few documentaries that the pool hose that remains of the house is the same pool hose that her Baumeister allegedly used, which would also venture to guess, then why was the investigation so botched that they wouldn't take a pool hose that was in the pool? So I don't know how much truth there is to that, but that's interesting to me. So that's how he would kill the men. Then what he would do is he would put them in it was like a sump pump room. We actually went into, I filmed that, behind the pool. He would then leave them in there for a while. Then he would cut them up, and then he would take them out into the woods into a burn pile, okay? Of where I stood at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the night, God knows why. Anyway, and I'll have to tell you, so anyway, well, I can talk about that another time. So anyway, let me get back to my notes. So, okay, read the Wikipedia. And I just think that at the time that this was going on, there was a lot of, there still is to this day, obviously, but there was a lot of homophobia that was going on in the Midwest. There was a lot of homophobia that was going on in Indianapolis. I couldn't hold the hand of somebody I was dating walking down the street. I couldn't, you know, like, it was scary to even go into gay bars. There were actually gay policemen that parked in front of gay bars at night so that they were safe for us to go in and out of at that time. I think that's something that still happens to this day. So it's interesting to me that this case was never looked into further when all of these men were missing. And some, I mean, we're talking 30 years later, are just now being investigated and just now being identified, you know? So it's very, very sad for me, but I want to get into more about how my story about this all came out. So around the time that he was captured, which was not captured, that he was found when he killed himself in Canada, was in 1996 that happened. So probably a year after that, my roommate and I, she now lives in Berlin, and I had been sober at that time. I got sober December 17th of 1994, so at that point I would have been sober 2.5, 3 years. We were obsessed with watching the A&E television show Investigative Reports, and I think it was Bill Curtis that did it. And we were watching a documentary that was about her Baumeister in Indianapolis. I had heard about the serial killings going on, but to be really honest with you, it wasn't, like, we were scared, but it wasn't something that stopped people from going out or a lot of people were talking about and things like that. So when my roommate and I were watching this documentary, we were absolutely intrigued, right? And so we started watching this documentary and putting things together. In fact, they would show the gay bar and they would show the dance floor and flash these lights and stuff. We thought it was ridiculous. And that was kind of where my intrigue started with this. And I thought, I could have met this guy. I may have met this guy. I mean, that was in the middle of my absolute horrible addiction when I was drunk on that dance floor, seeing strangers, blah, blah, blah. I mean, who knows if I ever met him, right? And so that was kind of where my interest with the case started. But there wasn't really much to follow through the years because they really never talked about it past that A&E investigation. So flash forward years later, I did a YouTube video. Let me make sure I'm telling this all in order because I want to make sure I don't leave anything out. You know, years later, I had kind of like forgotten about the story and whatever, and I saw this documentary, okay, and it was, or not documentary, I saw this guy, and his name is John Lorden Arts, and he is somebody that covers a lot of true crime. He actually watches true crime documentaries and then comments on them. He was actually interviewed in the documentary on Netflix about the Cecil Hotel in San Francisco and the missing girl, and so he had done a review of the documentary called The Haunting at Fox Hollow Farms, okay, and he just panned it and said it was like the worst documentary in the entire world. It's not a very well done documentary, but it's interesting when you talk about like the paranormal aspect of why everybody's focused on that. That piqued my interest again, and I started looking into this and looking and watching whatever there was. And at the time that John Lorden did this review of this documentary, there was really nothing out there except for this documentary that had been put out on YouTube called The Haunting of Fox Hollow Farms. There was really nothing out there at all about her Baumeister. In fact, I looked last night, and there really still isn't anything. There's some news footage of him being interviewed. There's this, there's that. There's a few true crime channels that have talked about it, but not much. You know, My Favorite Murderer did a whole episode live about him, but that's it. There's not like a lot of people that have been talking about this story, and I always wonder why that is, because it's a solved case, right? But what if it's not a solved case? So at the time that I watched this, I actually did a video. I can't even remember what the names of these videos are, but it was something, I don't even remember really what I said, but I said something about like I may have met a serial killer, and I talked about going out to these gay bars, and I told the story of her Baumeister, right? I did like 2 videos about that, talking about it. And after that, I can't remember the timing of all of this, okay? But after that, I was like so I've been sober since 1994, go to 12-step meetings. I was at a meeting that I don't typically go to with my friend Tanya, okay, who is also sober. She shared that in videos. I'm not breaking her anonymity and anything like that. We were at a meeting, and afterwards, I had seen this guy that I used to go out with way back in the day, okay, and I saw him at this meeting, and we were talking afterwards, and we were joking and telling stories about the old times and whatever. Well, I had done these videos about her Baumeister and talked about him with Tanya, and Tanya, who loves true crime and mystery, was intrigued by it as well, and would always say, I'm so glad that you were not taken by him because you were like the perfect victim of being drunk in a bar, going home by yourself, things like that, right? And I think that was so much why I related so much to these victims and their stories, was because it could have been me, you know? I can't even tell you how many times I left the bar by myself, drunk, you know, and things like that. And so we were standing out there talking and sharing stories, and Tanya said to this guy, she never met him before, right? She said, I'm so thankful that you guys weren't taken by that Herb Baumeister serial killer and that you never went to his house. And this guy looked at me. I made a follow-up video talking about this. And this guy looked at me and he goes, we did go there, don't you remember? And I go, what are you talking about? And he was like, girl, I remember I had this gold lame. Tanya could tell this story. She was sitting here right now. He was like, I had this gold lame, hot pants on and blah, 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 or shirt or something like that. And we went out there with this other person. And when he said this other person's name that I had absolutely forgotten that I ever hung out with or friends with, and it was for a very brief period of my life, everything clicked for me. And I was like, there's got to be truth to this story. But I was a blackout drinker, and I didn't really remember a lot. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, we went to his house. He was like, yeah, we went there for an after party. Don't you remember? It was you, me, and this other guy. And he was like, and then you went to the bathroom, and things got really, really weird. And then you came back, and then our friends started getting weird, so we left. He was like, you don't remember that? I go, because he wanted us to get in the pool or something. And he was like, you don't remember that? I was like, I don't remember that at all. So I did a follow-up video about that. Well, after I did that follow-up video, hold on a second, my throat's getting dry. After I did that follow-up video, I started getting contacted by quite a few people, okay? People wanting to share their stories with me, people that knew things, people that were like the cousins of a unidentified man, a cousin of a victim, aunts of victims, cousins of victims, never like the direct family, but it, you know, somewhat immediate family would reach out to me and say, thank you for keeping this story alive because nobody's talking about it, nobody's investigating it, nobody's looking into this or whatever, right? And they would always say, I feel like there's more to this story. And I got reached out to by all these people. Well, then I got reached out to by this woman that was putting together a paranormal investigation of several people in Indiana and the Midwest that do paranormal investigations, and they were going to Fox Hollow Farms. The owner of Fox Hollow Farms, whose intention was to open it for tours, okay? And I want to make that very clear. His intention was to film a documentary, okay, and then to open it to tours. That was his goal of buying the house. He said that to us when we were there. I think it may even be in the footage, or he said it to us. My friend Melissa can verify that. He said that to us, okay? He's since put out a book, so there is some truth to that, right? There was an ulterior motive for him buying this house, okay? It wasn't just that they wanted this big house. The house was spooky. I can tell you right now, if Melissa was sitting right here, when we went through this house, it was dusty as hell. I don't even believe they lived in this house, okay? I think they were there for that day so that they could, like, show us the house. I mean, the house, like, literally, like, we went through, like, I mean, they were putting up paranormal investigation equipment everywhere. We went into the bedroom and the bathroom. The bathroom had dust everywhere underneath the soap bottles. I mean, it was like this place was unlived in. I don't believe these people lived there, okay? I believe these people bought the house to do something with, to perpetuate the story. I don't think they're involved in any way in the murders or anything like that, but I think that they were wanting to basically buy true crime memorabilia and write a book about their experiences of living there and make it like there was a paranormal situation because the wife is the one that supposedly saw a ghost in the backyard. To this day, I'm not really sure I entirely believe that. I think the intention of buying the home was to goose up this story of this being a paranormal place and turn it into a paranormal hotspot that people would want to come and visit to. And that's why they ended up writing the book and they wanted to make a movie about it and a documentary. They told us all about that, right? Okay. But one of the things that they did say, he even brought out the booklet that was left with the house that had like, showed pictures of the bones and showed this and showed that. I wasn't allowed to videotape that part. Melissa was like, I mean, it had all the police investigation reports. He had all that information there. It was very, very bizarre. So we went out there and we did that paranormal investigation, okay? And after I did the investigation, at the time, it was all kind of like fun and games. I'm just trying to be as honest as possible about this. It was all kind of like fun and games, but I got very sad afterwards. There was a point where we were sitting in the living, so there's like a basement living room area that looks into the pool. And I just got like this overwhelming sadness. I kind of had it the whole time that we were there. I had this overwhelming sadness. And on the way home, I just didn't feel right about it. The whole thing didn't feel right about doing the paranormal investigation and things like that. You know, in retrospect, I'm glad that I went because I'm glad that I saw the house and I saw that kind of stuff. But it just didn't feel right to me. And I can tell you that there was a sense to me that there was no closure to this whole situation, right? So I did that. And then, of course, every time I talk about him on video, I get reached out to by multiple people wanting to share their stories with me, what interests they have in it, things they found, and whatever. Then about a year and a half ago, I was contacted by somebody that was a friend acquaintance of mine years ago, okay? That I literally hadn't heard from in years, all right? In fact, when he texted me, I was like, am I even like still friends with this person on Facebook? I don't even know where they live. They lived in a different state. They had moved away. They had started a new career. I mean, I didn't know anything about this person anymore, right? And he told me that he had been at an event and somebody approached him about the Baumeister case, okay? And this person was in the field that had to do with things similar to that, but had never done anything to do with true crime. There was no reason why he would be approached by this, except that he was from Indiana. And this person came to him and said that he wanted to talk to him more about it. And so my friend gave him his number and whatever. My friend actually taped the entire phone calls, has all the audio files, things like that. All this has been forwarded to the police, and they were going to turn it over, allegedly, to the FBI. And when he approached me with it and was like, what do you think I should do with this? I said, you need to turn this over to the police or the FBI. Like, this is like serious business, and it's all been turned over at this point. But what this person alleged, and I don't want to get into the details of it, okay? Because if I'm going to do that later, I want to have 100% approval that I can get on video and I can do this from this guy, because this is really scary what it implicates, okay? But basically what this guy implicated was that Baumeister wasn't at the top of the chain, that there was actually somebody that was bigger, that was an enforcer, okay? That was at the top of this, and there was about 6 to 8 very powerful men that were involved in this ring where they were getting gay men, okay, that nobody would miss, and they were basically filming snuff films of these gay men. Now, one thing that we do know about Baumeister was that the night before he killed himself, supposedly, allegedly, in Canada, that a police officer pulled him over, okay? She had no reason to search the car. This is in the documentaries, if you watch them. This is also in the book. But she had no reason to search the car, but in the backseat of the car, she saw a bag full of videotapes, okay? To this day, those videotapes have never been recovered. They are nowhere to be found. But there's a lot of speculation about the death of Baumeister, okay? He supposedly shot himself, but at the place that he was shot, the gun was so far away from him that he would have had to have done it and thrown the gun, okay? They have found evidence of that it's almost impossible, even though later other people have come out and said that's not true, it was right by him. But at the time that it happened, every person that talked about it said there was no way, the gun was nowhere in distance to him, okay? Also, the way that he was displayed, there's a paranormal aspect to it, okay, that would almost inclinate some kind of like occult kind of group to this whole kind of thing, the way that he was spread out and all this kind of stuff, and where it was picked and all this kind of stuff, all right? And so there's always been speculation that there was more people involved, which is part of why I am scared to tell this story. Now, everything that has ever been sent to me, every piece of information that I already have, has already been downloaded onto a file months, I think a year and a half ago, when I was sent this by 2 separate people, okay? And I've since then had several other people that have verified some of these things. I put that all on, saved it, and gave it to 2 people that I implicitly trust, that I have never talked about online, that nobody knows that I have a connection with whatsoever, okay? Just to make that clear. So, because this is the scary part of the story. Because I was actually talking to another YouTuber today on the phone, and I said, I'm not really sure I want to do this video. I'm kind of scared to make it, and put myself out there and things like that. And he was like, these people would be like 80 years old. Baumeister would be like 80 years old. Well, no, he really wouldn't be. Baumeister was, I think, let's see on here what year he was born. I was born in 72. Baumeister, let me pull up his Wikipedia, was born in 47. So, I mean, really only, if there are people that were younger than him, we're talking older than me, these people would be 70 at this time. There are still people around that age. I know my math is off, okay? 72, 47 to 57, 57 to 67. So he was 23 years older than me, so 73, 74. I have a lot of friends of mine in recovery that are 73, 74, that are very active, that have full lives. I mean, these men could still be out there, right? So, these videotapes have never been found. Now, allegedly, what they think happened was that he threw them in the water, okay? That was what was told, that he got rid of these videotapes. But what if he wasn't working alone? What if he never killed himself? What if he was actually killed? This person that contacted my friend said that he actually wrote a letter before he went to Canada to these other people telling them that he had the videotapes that could expose what was going on, okay? And that he actually wrote a note talking about all of this to these people, that this person knows of this note, knows who this person is that's the head of this group, all right? And that also, and this is all just speculation, there could be no truth to this whatsoever, and that Herb Baumeister actually didn't kill himself, right? That he was the easy target because it all happened at his house and everybody was looking at his house. Well, one thing that you have to note is that these murders always occurred when his wife was out of town at the lake house, okay? She would go there for weeks at a time, or she would go there for a weekend. They always occurred at that time. At the time that I went to Fox Hollow Farms, it's a gated house, okay? The house is a mile off of the gate, right? You are set back in the woods. If there were 6 to 8 or 20 powerful men that were out there and this was all going on, not to mention, there is a window that looks into the pool room, okay? Where they could have been sitting, looking into the pool room, recording the whole thing as it happened, okay? So was Herb Baumeister the one that was actually doing the killings? And these people, as this person speculates, were helping them clean it up afterwards and getting rid of it, and it all took place. And Herb Baumeister, yes, is a serial killer, but was also just part of a bigger plan? I mean, the implications of that are pretty scary. What's scarier than that is that I've actually had a couple other people that have reached out to me since then, not knowing this person, not knowing that this person ever reached out to me. I have mentioned slightly information I received on video, okay, about this, that didn't know that I even knew this person. There's no way they could ever know that I know this person. I didn't even know these people that reached out to me that implicated very similar things and used the same language, okay? I also had somebody that I do trust implicitly that reached out to me, and I hadn't talked to this person in probably 15, 20 years, okay? And indicated what could possibly be on the videotapes. That was even scarier because the story that it painted went even deeper than that. Now, both of these people I've reached out to, both of these people have contacted the police, both of these people have told their stories to the police. This is nothing that the police do not know, okay? So just want to make that very clear. But it's interesting that this information has never been put out. This information has never been discussed in a documentary. None of this information has been brought, right? But here I'm having these people contact me. When I make this video today, I can tell you, I will get a lot of emails from people from non-disclosed accounts that will contact me and give me information that they know. How is it that after 30 years of a closed, solved case, because they found the bodies on Herb Baumeister's property, is the case closed? Or were there people possibly behind the scenes that were controlling what was going on, and Herb Baumeister, yes, a serial killer, was also the one that took the fall for the greater, okay? That there were many more people that were involved in this story. And when you look at it from that point of view, and I can tell you, I don't even have as many details as some of these people do, because I asked them that I did not want to know all those details, that they should release them to the police, you know? But maybe it's time for those people to come out and tell their stories. I don't know. You know, maybe it's time, because I believe the victim stories need to be told. I believe that the victims need to be identified. I think that it's time, right? So let me get back to my notes here, and yeah, I was later contacted by someone that I had previously known who told me a very similar story, and that Herb had an accomplice, had many accomplices, but had one that he was working with very, very closely, and 6 to 8 men that were part of this group. Was it easier for one man to take responsibility than take down a group of powerful men? Could this really be about a group of powerful men that were filming snuff films behind the scenes? Was the evidence of who these people are actually on the videotapes, and the videotapes weren't the snuff films that people thought that it was about? The videos were Herb implicating himself? Was it actually evidence, and there was other filmings that were going on in this house of who these men actually were? Did Herb Baumeister actually have physical evidence on videotape, and that's why he was killed? Was he killed? Did he kill himself? Are the videotapes still out there? Because one person said to me, the videotapes are still out there. Another person said to me that they knew the videotapes were still out there. That's two people with very similar stories that are extremely detailed, okay? That have also taken this to the police, that said that the information is still, that the videotapes are still out there. Well, how could that possibly be? Herb Baumeister was in Canada. He reached out to his brother for money. Why would Herb Baumeister reach out to his brother for money if he was going to go to Canada and kill himself? His reaching out to his brother for money implicates that he planned on staying in Canada alive for a while. So who else was in Canada? The story doesn't make sense to me, and I don't believe that the case is solved. Was it not his intention to kill himself, but instead blackmail people with those tapes? Is that the secret that's been kept for 30 years? Was his death possibly not a suicide, but instead convenient? And why has the focus always been on the haunting of Fox Hollow Farms instead of finding the victims? Why has that been the focus of interest? I'm always a believer whenever I do anything that I cover over here, whether it's drama or talking about some movie that I watch or whatever, I always am looking at the intentions of deflection. It's always a point it's very interesting to me. And the narrative of the paranormal at Fox Hollow Farms has always been something that has been focal point to the story. In fact, it's where my attention was directed when I started focusing more attention on looking at the victims. When it's the actual story of the victims, who they are, why they went missing, and who their families are that have missed them for all their years, that needs to be told. So what I am interested in is, why has the focus been deflected to the paranormal? And was that possibly intentional? Could it be? I think the story isn't just ending with Herb Baumeister being the serial killer. I think it's interesting that nobody has ever come out and, said, I know this person, I know that person, blah, blah, blah. And yet all these people behind the scenes are saying that there's accomplices. I've heard from two separate people different descriptions of what the accomplice looks like, and they're not similar, right? Which could implicate that there were more people. When we did the paranormal investigation, they told us, the owner of the house told us that many people had told him that there were accomplices to these murderers. So the whole story is very interesting to me, right? It's like at the time that the story started picking up more attention and somebody else bought the house, I believe that the intention of buying the house and seeing the ghost in the woods and having psychics out to that and doing the documentary of the haunting of Fox Hollow Farms, okay? I believe the intention of that was to gain attention, okay, off of this house. I don't believe that that owner's intention was a deflective tactic. But I do wonder if it wasn't then later used by the people, because the story had been forgotten. Nobody was talking about it. They weren't finding bones. In fact, just recently in the last 3 to 6 months is when this news story has really picked up and people are talking about it. And yet again, the focus is on the paranormal of Fox Hollow Farms. I'm so happy that finally the news and the police are focusing on the stories of the victims. Because I think that there is so much more of a story here than has ever been told. And I'm not entirely sure that anybody knows that but the victims. And I think the victim stories need to be told. And I don't think this is the end of it. And I don't think that the beginning and the end came with Herb Baumeister. The coincidences of how this story came to me is so bizarre. I live one street, a 10-minute walk from the house that Herb Baumeister grew up on. I didn't find that out until 2 or 3 years ago, talking to my neighbor that used to work with somebody that was very close to Herb Baumeister. The connections I have had to this story, the way that this story keeps on circling around me, feels as if this is a story I was supposed to tell. And I think that there's more to tell about this story. Let me know if you guys would like to hear more. I love you, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.